joining us? Joining us? Lecture, half just forum, and this is more discussion. And hopefully you got the worksheet. But again, just trying to cover some of the ways that we said, how do we as Christians differ on things and yet still be Christian? How do we apply the gospel when we see things like the George Floyd murder, or we see the riots, or we see now this week everybody's up in arms about the election and whether there's fraud or not, and so there's a lot of concern about that. And so we talked a lot about how do we have discussions without labeling people or dominating the conversation so that nobody else can talk, or only listening to reload, and so forth and so on. And we had sort of an open forum on how as a church do we respond to racism, and how do we address some of the things that we're wrestling through. But today is more on actually applying the gospel to these topics that we've brought up, and seeing if we can actually ladies, would you all just change your name to Nancy? It would just make it so much easier if we could just do that, So, with that, I wanted to kind of go over some of the questions and see if we can make sure that we are thinking about this in terms of the gospel, and not just thinking about this in terms of how would we do this just from a practical standpoint or from a political standpoint. We don't want to do that. Other people do that. We want to figure out how to apply the gospel, right? So the first question I asked is, how exactly does the gospel redeem individuals, families, attitudes, institutions, injustices? And the reason I'm asking that question is our ability to answer and discern the principles in these scenarios will help us with some of our current scenarios that we're wanting to address, but wanting to address appropriately. So I'm throwing that question out, and it's a broad question, which means you can jump in pretty much on any one of these ramps. But how does the gospel actually redeem? And you can answer any of these: individuals, families, attitudes, institutions, injustices. So if we could bypass the 60 seconds of evangelical humility, which is, the leader asks a question and there's like 60 seconds of silence before somebody pops up. What would you say to that question? Hopefully you had a chance to ponder it a little bit. And if you'd raise your hand so the mic people can make sure to get it to you, unless the mic people would like to go first. Okay, Laura.
Well, I think the answer to all of these is love.
Okay.
The gospel, that's the message, is without love, we can't do anything. Without God's love through us and God loving the people and families and everything, nothing will change or happen.
Okay. So the gospel redeems an individual by loving them when they
By
feel
showing
like
them that God
unlovable.
loves them and desiring a relationship with Him.
Or in the terms of families, say, a marriage is on the verge of divorce and there's so much contempt, and the gospel might inject love for one another.
Right.
And maybe it's a longer process. Or how about institutions? At least I threw that one in for you because I know you worked with Prison Fellowship you still work with Prison Fellowship, don't you?
Well, I volunteer with them when I can get into the
Laura, could you give her the mic so that she can?
Sure.
Thank you. Oh, never mind. So tell me a little bit about how the gospel redeems institutions like, say, a prison where people aren't being reformed. Actually, they're just coming out of prison better criminals. And yet prison fellowship has done something very, very different. How did the gospel redeem an institution like our current penal system?
Right. And I'm sorry to say I didn't look at these questions in advance. I just printed it out, assuming we'd be talking about them, so I should have given them some more thought. But just speaking for me, okay, I volunteer for many years at the Racine Correctional Institution. I should know how many thousand men are there, but I don't. I want to say like 1,200 to 1,800. My class was about 30 to 40 guys. And the class I was working with when the pandemic hit was on Christian worldview. So it was very much into this idea, how does Christianity, how does our salvation impact every point of our life? So it was very much, along this. But as far as the gospel redeeming an institution, it's only through the individuals that are a part of it. The guys that were in the class, as their lives were changed, their interactions with their families and their cellies and their the officers and everything changed. And and it's a process. I mean, nobody turns perfect overnight. And a lot of the things that they did in the class was working the rough edges off of, their lives. But at the end of every class, one of the older, more mature inmates, both chronologically and spiritually, he would always say, each one, reach one, as we were leaving the room. And that just the charge to the guys, this, our relationship with Jesus doesn't end here. It needs to go out into the institution. So I guess that would be just off the top of my head, one of the things.
So the gospel was brought to the prisoners. They were introduced to Christ dying on the cross for them, paying for their sins, but also a Christian worldview about how to view this world that we live in and their place in this world. It wasn't just, here's how you get your get out of hell free card. It was about seeing the world through the eyes of the gospel, which then started changing them.
Right, and I didn't do that class all the time. I do a lot of other topics. I do a lot of Tony Evans stuff that was more specifically Bible study on a particular book of the Bible or whatever. But it's ironic that we were just starting about half the way through this course and everything got shut down. Of course, we didn't know when we left one day that we wouldn't be back together.
Right.
So I was able to send, and due to fraternization rules, I can't correspond with the inmates. But I was able to have the Office of Prison Fellowship send in a document just encouraging them. What are you going to do with your time? How can you use these lessons? How can you reach one, during the time that we're shut down? That was back in April, and we had no idea it was going to be extending this long, but hopefully what they've learned they're applying.
Okay. So basically, if I can summarize, the gospel offers the hope of the eternal. It offers a way of viewing the world through the eyes of the scriptures. It then pinpoints some of the places where the curse has done the most damage, I suppose. I mean, you really wouldn't talk to prisoners about things that are irrelevant to them, but you would pinpoint the places where the gospel really needs to address them the most, right? Would you say that?
The material that I was using specifically started out with what is truth, and then what are meant. We are fallen creatures.
Right.
And who is God, and how does God redeem us? And then from then, it moved into, how does this impact our family? How does this impact employment? How does this impact government? How does this impact the way we look at history? So from that perspective, the course, my Bible study is more discipleship-oriented than evangelistic. Some of the guys that come aren't Christians, but most of them are.
Okay, good. Anybody else want to take a stab at how exactly does the gospel redeem? Perry? Can you use the mic because people are watching online so they can hear
First
you?
of all, the gospel is the good news.
Yeah.
And redeemed is being brought back to God. And the combination of the good news and being brought back to God gives us a new hope. That new hope affects every area of our life and gives us a new perspective concerning our life and the lives of others, giving us more respect for ourselves and more respect for God and more respect for each other. And then with this, we have now a new hope.
Very well done. Great. Anybody else? How's the gospel redeem families? How's the gospel redeem injustices? Have you heard of ministries that deal with the grave injustice of human trafficking? How does the gospel redeem these kinds of injustices? Do you know? No? Nobody's ever heard of International Justice Mission? Yeah, Nancy?
Just going back to the first question, how does the gospel redeem, for example, educational institutions? I think I'm struggling to understand what you mean by how does the gospel redeem the institution. I know that might sound kind of silly, but I have a reason for that. Are you talking about if, for example, my educational institution where I go to school and where I work, it's a university, they're not Christian leaders.
Yeah.
So they're not Christian leaders, for example, the president of the school, but I get almost weekly, we get faculty weekly emails where, we have these differences going on. He doesn't use the words show grace, kindness, and love, but we're to be open and accepting. We don't know where our students are coming from. I teach over 75% non-traditional adult students who come from horrendous type situations. And so I've learned over time to be more accepting of that and not just say, well, you knew the deadline. Sometimes the logic is not always there if you're in an unusual situation. For the faculty side of it, we know what the leaders of the school are saying, but faculty still struggle with that, to show kindness, grace, and love. There are many liberal faculty members there and employees. There are also several conservative who you'll know that in conversations. There are also Christians who work there too. I've seen at employee events and also at my in-residences that there's a clash between the two sometimes. And so I've always tried to make it a habit to not clash or say, well, you're a liberal, I'm not. There's something wrong there. You don't want to go that route. So I can see with my institution, I've been a part of it since 2008, but on faculties for 5 years now, that they're trying to help us see, show kindness, grace, love without using those words. And I've tried that with some, not faculty, but higher up employees, and then some faculty. And a lot of them are accepting of that. And we had so much in common and so much great times together when I would go to events or in residences until they found out I was a believer, until they found out I was conservative. Then their attitude changed toward me. So with that question of how exactly does the gospel redeem educational institutions, I don't struggle with that happening, but sometimes how to be that example. I'm not sure how to continue doing that sometimes.
Oh, yeah. So the question is, what do you mean by redeeming an institution? Well, I mean, and you kind of can't do that unless you're invited to do it, or you come up with an alternative. But a couple case examples. Excuse me. Prison fellowship, again, is one of the classic examples of this, where in South America, Chuck Colson would would tell you, well, he would have told you he's with the Lord now, but he was invited into a South American prison where they had lost all control, and they were told, you can do whatever you want to do, this is a lost cause. And Colson went in and realized they were treating the prisoners like animals. And the first thing he did is started with the gospel that said, these human beings are human beings, they've been made in God's image, and I'm going to treat them like that, and we're going to change the culture in this prison. And it was radically reformed. I mean, if you take Colson's word for it, which I would, he's a pretty trustworthy kind of guy. But that would be a case where they were invited into an institution that had policies that were non-biblical, and he instituted biblical principles into this institution and reformed the institution itself. That would be a case study of that. Or a lot of failing schools in the inner city. Sometimes groups or even Christian groups will start a charter school to provide an alternative, because they may not be able to reform the school that's been destroyed, from within, but they can create an alternative that creates another example. That might be an example of reforming institutions. So that's kind of what I'm driving at with how the gospel changes not just a person, but an institution potentially. Laura, and
That, though, it has to start with the individual, because without
Yeah.
Chuck Colson having that, nothing would happen. So with all these things, it is the gospel, but yet it's got to be the impact of the gospel on a person who says, I got to do something.
right,
And that's what it is. It's like, I feel Christ's love, so I'm going to try to do something in the prisons. I'm a teacher. I can't reform everything, but I can deal with the kids I've got,
Right.
and that's what I'm going to do. So it might not be that huge and broad, but it's got to start. And the same thing, like you said, with that human trafficking. Somebody's got to start to do something and feel the need to do that because of Christ's love, and I'm going to do it because otherwise it's not going to happen. But that's where it starts. And same thing with the marriage, with everything. It starts with us, one person.
right, right. And human trafficking would have been one of those examples where the Gary, can't remember his name, he's the head of the International Justice Mission, but he worked for the government and saw the human trafficking and said, as a Christian, I can't just turn a blind eye. He created an organization that was going to, and it's a much more radical approach with the gospel, where you actually break into these places, rescue these little girls, get them out of there. But the situation is much more radical. And so it requires, they don't go killing people, but they do kick down doors and grab little girls and get them out of there. And then other organizations grew up to say, once you've rescued them from there, how do you prevent them from going back to it? Because if they have no other alternatives, that's what they'll do, or they'll be dragged back into it. And so other ministries came up to try to help these girls that have been used as sex slaves. And here's the gospel once again being applied to, hey, these are human beings made in God's image. You can't treat them like this. And so somebody took the initiative, as you said, and people changed the issues of injustice and changed made awareness of it, created more of an awareness of it, created avenues to do it, et cetera, et cetera. So that'd be an application of the gospel. With that, yeah.
I think a big word that was used is respect, and you're saying that with Chuck Colson, and that we respect others as being human beings. And the gospel is something that I think we all have to preach to ourselves every day, and part of the gospel for me is the whole submitting to Jesus. And I think of in his leading and what he's calling us to, and I think of Abraham and Sarah, and how Sarah came up with an idea of how to create God's plan. And it's often happens in my life, maybe no one else, that I try to help God out, and it just makes a bigger mess.
Yeah.
So being submissive to what Jesus is calling us to.
Right. Right. Well, I think unless there's some lack of clarity there, I think question one, you kind of understand where I'm going with it. So once again, it's not you get saved, see you in heaven. That's not, that's not it, right? Yeah, just make sure that mic touches your chin so we can hear you. Because if you got it here or you're doing this, we can't hear you. And people online. All right. So here's the next question, and that is, so what are some of the graces that the gospel offers as a countercultural movement? I encourage you hopefully to read the Beatitudes, the fruits of the Spirit, etc. But what are some of the graces of the gospel, the graces that the gospel offers to help bring healing, to help bring restoration, redemption, etc.? Because it's one thing to say love, but then what kind of love? Or what does that look like? Because that can be very broad, can it not? But what about the Beatitudes? What about the fruits of the Spirit that kind of give you some of the things that you would apply as carriers of the gospel? You're allowed to cheat and look. It's Matthew 5, Galatians 5.
Well, I think for me, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control, they're great words. And that until we internalize them and really live them out in the trying times, in the times when we want to feel anything but love, joy, peace, patience, and so on, we won't make an impact. If we react like the rest of the world to someone throwing hate at us, we're just part of the problem. And I really love all the Beatitudes, but really this week I think speaking to my heart was, blessed are the peacemakers. And boy, do we need to be peacemakers in our world. And whether we do it real actively, by marching and proclaiming love, or whether we do it just in our everyday interactions with each other, and especially if we do it with somebody who disagrees with us. Our world needs peace, and we need to be praying for peace, and we need to be demonstrating that. And I love Laura, what you said about, we can't change everything, but we can change our little corner. We can be peacemakers where we are. And so, it takes one person to start and, just pass it on. So appreciate your comments.
Mm-hmm. Graces from some of these passages, not limited to these two. I just give you two examples. We could have gone to 2 Peter 1. We could have gone to some other passages as well, but Philippians 4. Graces you can give. I'll read a couple off for you. Blessed are the meek, which means the humble, not like, I think when we hear words like meek, we go, cowardly, fearful. That's not what it means. It means humble. It's humble. For they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, that which is right. There's something good about confronting social issues, in the name of hungering and thirsting for righteousness too. But also, blessed are the merciful. How do we give mercy out? Blessed are the pure in heart. Blessed are the peacemakers. That was the one that I was kind of gunning for, given how much contention we are seeing in our society. We're so divided. Ouch. Blessed are those who are persecuted. Whoever thought that maybe enduring persecution in a godly way, and who knows whether we're going to have to do it or not. Sounds like, Nancy, you kind of have to do it a little bit where you're at. And you'll have to spread the gospel a little bit by enduring well, right? Those are some of the things. Or the fruits of the Spirit. Now, obviously, I'll be touching on this at some point in the sermon series, but the fruits of the Spirit, I know you're going to rattle off love, joy, peace, patience, goodness, kindness, all that stuff, but what are those? Are those actions? Those are attributes. Those are virtues. Those are character traits. Right. And they stand in opposition to, if you've read Galatians 5, the fruit of the Spirit are the opposite of what? See if anybody knows their Galatians. The deeds of the flesh, right. See? And what are the deeds of the flesh? This is very fascinating to me, because the opposite of goodness, love, joy, peace, goodness, kindness, all that. Here's the deeds of the flesh, verse 5:19. Sexual immorality, impurity, debauchery, idolatry, witchcraft. Now listen to the rest of them. Hatred, discord, jealousy, fits of rage, selfish ambition, dissensions, factions, things. All of those are words that are used to describe to tear people apart from one another. Whereas the fruits of the Spirit, if you're practicing them, do what? They bring people together. I mean, who doesn't want to be around people who are kind? One of the most underrated virtues, I might add. We never bring that one up. But boy, what a powerful one. Forbearance, endurance, peace, goodness, gentleness, self-control. Those are things that bring people together. These are some of the graces that we would apply for the gospel. So we understand, first, the gospel doesn't just give you your get-out-of-hell-free card, right? It redeems everything that's been damaged by the curse if it's given opportunity, and it's powerful. And two, there are certain things that are involved in applying this gospel, particularly these graces that are part of or an outgrowth of the gospel, right? So it's not just, get them saved. Yes, get them saved, but more than that. I mean, you even said, right, at Prison Fellowship, you talked about, salvation, but you talked about Christian worldview, right? So what are the things that I can do individually, hopefully you've been thinking about this for the past 4 weeks, to apply these graces to specific situations and relationships? And primarily, we talked a lot about the last 3 or 4 weeks, racism, racial issues, things like that are going on. The questions of Black Lives Matter as a concept versus an organization, things that are happening in our neighborhoods. In Wauwatosa, they had riots going on, and I know a lot of people were pretty upset about that, and yet, nobody's in favor of racism. We would like to combat that too. How do you do this? So think about situations in your life or situations you would like to address that maybe are a little further away from you, but you would like to address them. Or relationships. And then think about the grace that you would apply to those. Have you thought about situations and or relationships where you need to apply the gospel to? Particularly as we've talked about it in this class. Because hopefully we're not just talking about it, right? I mean, the whole point of this session, this last session, is to do something about it, right? Because we all said that, right? All right, so situation or relationship. You can come up with that first. Something you feel like the gospel needs to be applied. Not to put you on the spot, Lori, but you brought up the fact that you knew some people that you rented out places in the hair salon, and they felt discriminated against, and they said, most of our friends don't come past 124th Street. So that might be a situation you would like to say, how would I apply the gospel to that to
So this is what
change
I
things?
do. I don't feel like it's completely effective, I guess, but
A little closer to the
it's
mouth.
only me. I can only do what I can do.
Right.
So I do rent out, there are 15 rooms, and I'm the one that rents out the rooms to people, and when hairdressers come in to rent, I'm not one to decide if they're good enough for the situation. I'm the one, you pay for the rent and you're good enough. But I was, like I said last week, I was raised that I don't judge a person by the color of their skin. And I just don't. I don't know why. So the first people that I rented to that had darker skin, when it came out, a couple of people complaining about them, I didn't understand what it was about. I didn't catch on, because they, of course, were smart enough not to say it's a race thing. And then it took me a while. And when I talked to the two women, I talked about it through the complaining. You guys got to be a little bit quieter, or, different things. They had a TV in their room, and they had it on too loud. And yes, I think it was Tony Evans they were playing, and he can get loud. And so I told them, you guys can't have the TV going, and okay, fine. And then that was generally the thing, was they were noisy, the general complaint. And then finally, when it occurred to me, I think this is racism, and I was shocked by it. Then I took those two women aside and I said, I am so sorry. I did not see this coming. They were very, duh. They weren't surprised at all what it was all about. And we worked it out, but yet they didn't stay super long after that because it was difficult. One woman pointed her comb at me and said, Laura, you're trying to do something here that's just not going to work out. And I was shocked. This was a very Christian forward kind of woman. And I guess I would say I didn't necessarily deal with it. I dealt with love to all the renters, but I didn't deal with her, what are you saying and why are you saying that you're being racist? I didn't get involved in her problem.
Sure. You should have pulled your hairdryer out on her.
Yes.
Well, that's what I'm doing.
Yes, I probably should have.
How'd you like some dry ends?
Exactly. But since then, and this was, I don't know, 10 years ago, and since then, now out of 15 rooms, maybe, I'm not counting, but maybe half are African American. I don't know, but people are feeling comfortable there, and the woman that complained, there were two main women that complained. One of them, she pretty quickly after those women left, then she retired, so to speak, and left. And then another woman, she just works still, even today, with her door closed, whatever. But I'm a landlord, but in that, I guess I'm somewhat of a leader. I don't treat people any different. You're going to pay me your rent, you're going to pay it on time, or you're going to hear from me. And it happens with all colors that I have to deal with that. And everyone there, I don't know. We have a good group of people. I just think they're all great. I don't know. So it's just, I forget what you asked.
Well, I mean, I was just asking how, given the circumstances that you ran into, was there any way maybe we could brainstorm how to apply the gospel to, to confront the woman who's kind of being racist on the sly?
Well,
do we figure out a Christian way of bringing people together and sorting through things and demonstrating kindness and hopefully, breaking down some of those barriers? I mean, what are some of the ways we could do
I asked the people
restoration?
There's two sections of this scenario I'm at, and the people in the hallway where there was the most complaints, I asked each one of them if we had a special meeting of what's going on this side, would you come to the meeting? And that's when I knew who was doing the real complaining, because some said, no, I have nothing to complain about. Some said, of course I'd come to the meeting. And some said, yes, I'll come to that meeting. And then I knew who was who. And we never had the meeting. It all somehow worked out. But, okay, I'll be honest with you. There's recently one woman that works there, and she brought in somebody who she might want to share her room with. And I heard that somebody say to somebody else, this is really great here. There's a lot of us here. She was African American. Now, if she had said that to me, I would have probably called her out. I would have said, you mean hairdressers? Because I don't want to draw those lines. I just don't. She didn't say it to me, so I didn't call her out. But
Sure.
I didn't go out of my way. But I think in our situation, because everyone is individual, I don't have to have this is how we behave thing, only how I behave.
Yeah. And you can't control how everybody behaves, but
Right.
just I want to use yours as an example. Maybe we can figure something out, but let me ask somebody else now. Is there a situation or a relationship that you were like, yeah, here it is, and here's where I'm trying to figure out how to apply the gospel to it? Everybody's doing great. Yeah, Laura.
Well, I've just been trying to educate myself. I mean, I've been trying to open up my mind to other thoughts and ideas, and thinking that I never have thought of myself as a racist, but I am a racist, and I think we all would, in certain aspects, we make certain generalities and certain stereotypes and stuff like that. And so I've just been reading and opening up my mind to, how I can change my thinking. And when I have come in conversations with some of my friends and some of these things come up, I'll just kind of gently point them out and say, just maybe try to say, hey, is that really, the way to think, or do we really think that way? Because I don't know. That's what I've been doing, is just trying to open up my mind more to educate myself, especially about
Self-assessment.
about culture, things like that. It's like, why can't they be like us? And that's the thinking of the dominant culture, right?
Yeah.
That's what we've always, whatever, the dominant. So it's like, why can't they be like us? If they would be like us, everything would be fine. And so I'm trying to, just hear a different voice and say, what have I not been hearing? When people are saying loudly, quietly, we don't feel represented, we don't feel treated right. And I keep thinking, I don't understand. It seems fine to me, But so just, again, just trying to educate myself, saying, what are they saying? What am I not seeing?
Yeah.
What am I not hearing? So,
Yeah.
and then, like I said, I try to be nice when I hear my friends talk about things that, would be considered racist or whatever, and I just try to gently point their attention to it.
Yeah. While you're thinking about that, I'll give you something that's been swimming around in my mind for a little bit. And that is when the George Floyd thing happened, and it was like, I'm watching the TV and I'm screaming at the TV, get off his neck, what's wrong with you, and then to know that, well, this happened, hours ago, and George Floyd was already dead. And, I was kind of dumbfounded why on earth this happened, and how could this possibly have happened, and I saw the protests and I saw the peaceful protests. I'm like, yeah, I get it, I understand it. And then talking with my friends Rodney and Rose, and Rodney and I are real good buds, but we never really talked about this issue. And our relationship was based more on, we're both Christians, we both have special needs kids, and Rodney and Rose are just about the nicest people on the planet. But when I really asked Rodney and Rose about, do you feel like nervous when you get pulled over? I mean, I get nervous because I don't want to get a ticket, but I don't ever worry about anything else happening to me. And they said, yeah, we do. And it got me to thinking about all this stuff. And I thought to myself, man, maybe I'm finally listening to stuff that, I was oblivious to. Or I said, well, I don't know if that's true. And gosh, maybe it is. Maybe there's something to it. And then, the protest kind of got overtaken by the Antifa groups that caused all the violence. And as I was watching all this, I was thinking to myself, if I were a peaceful protester and finally, the white community is kind of listening and saying, maybe we haven't been listening as closely as we should be listening. And then the Antifa groups took over, and nobody was talking about it anymore. We were all going, you're burning down what? You're destroying what? And here's these peaceful protesters actually having the opportunity to have the conversation, then the conversation got shut down. And I thought to myself, I wonder if there's some way to figure out how to continue having those conversations that were so meaningful and actually helpful. And is there some way we can come back to that? Because they did get interrupted, I think. And I thought the violence took away from all the great opportunity of progress that could have been had, Because now we're worried about, the looting and the rioting and the beating people up in the streets and stuff like that, burning buildings. And here are these peaceful protesters. I was trying to make a point. What we say, oh my gosh, what are they doing, And I thought, how do we reopen some of those conversations so that we can actually continue to have the ones that we need to have, that instead of letting them fade away, you know what I mean? Because we were starting to have them, and then all the chaos erupted, and we stopped having them. So those are some of the things that have been churning in my head when I think about how do I apply the gospel, because we were starting to have those conversations, and then we stopped. And then the outrage took over, and now we were all arguing about, burning down buildings or defunding police and stuff like that, and we weren't talking about the thing that we were originally talking about. Bill, did you have a point? I thought you were raising your hand. Oh, you're getting your glasses, okay. Thoughts on that? Laura? Yeah? Yeah, people, what's wrong with you guys? This is a forum.
I disagree with you on a lot of things. Like you said, I don't think there are that many riots. I think most of the protests are peaceful. We don't hear about them on the news. They've been protesting in Milwaukee every single day since that happened. You don't hear anything about it. Do you know that this is like the 160th day of protests? No, because we only heard about, the violent things. But it's been going on every day. There's somebody protesting. There's different groups protesting every day in our city. And again, I'm just going to say it because that's how I am. We think back to Colin Kaepernick taking the knee. That was peaceful, right? Mm-hmm. That was peaceful somebody saying, I don't like how we're being treated. We turned it around, and when I say we, I'm talking white people or whoever, and said it was about veterans and disrespecting our flag. When they said it was about how they're being treated, and we didn't listen, and that was peaceful. You can't get much more peaceful than taking a knee. Mm-hmm. So that's my thinking is, and I know a lot of people don't agree with me, and I'm not anti-veteran, I'm not anti-flag. I love our country, I love our flag, but we have to look at what we've done and say, maybe, again, are we listening? No, but we turned it into something else. Oh, they're disrespecting our flag. It was nothing about that. It was, look, I think back to, back to the 60s, those two guys in Mexico City at the Olympics raising their fist. Mm-hmm. All it was just a silent protest, saying we are not being treated fairly in this country, and we don't want to listen to that. And then we say, look at these riots. Look at what's going on, these riots. And it's like, it's not all about Antifa. That's, I just think it's people that are angry and frustrated and say, you're not listening to us.
Mm-hmm. No, that's fine. That's fine. Did somebody else want to say something? No, I think you bring up a good point. It's not just the riots, and I do think there's plenty of protests happening that are peaceful. And I look at Portland, and I talk to friends of mine that live in Portland, and it's a nightmare. And I have some friends in Seattle too that say, "Oh my gosh, it's horrible." So it's all across the spectrum. We have peaceful protests, we have very violent protests, we have groups that are infiltrating, and some that are angry, and some that are looking to cause chaos. I mean, it's a wide mess. But I think your point is good, because you're saying it's not just that it got interrupted by some of the violent protests. It's also been interrupted by us when we've decided not to listen, because we labeled it differently.
If you only do this, we'll listen. If you only do that, we'll listen. If you only, don't do this, we'll listen. It's
right.
Like we try to control everything.
Right. No, that's a good point.
I just wanted to kind of piggyback on that. I equated the whole violence thing, being pro-life, with somebody that burns down an abortion clinic or kills a doctor that's doing abortions. Mm-hmm. Then everybody focuses on that and categorizes everybody in the pro-life movement as crazy nutcases. I think that if we disagree with a movement, we look for a reason to disagree with them. So if some people are getting uncomfortable about these conversations, and hey, maybe I'm going to have to look at myself and evaluate where I'm coming from, then it's almost like we want to look for a reason to not have to do that. So if there's violence, then I was right, they really are all
Right,
nutcases.
it gives me the out.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah,
Right,
right, exactly.
right. And, I've been watching this clock up here, and I've been thinking it's still 10:21, and it's not. It's 10:45.
Can I just say one quick thing?
Yeah,
Dave?
please.
I really appreciate you, Laura,
Oh, there you
for the courage that you've had in expressing your views. And as Lisa followed up with that, the thing that really occurs to me that we talked about is when we disagree, we still have points of unity. I totally agree with what you said about, that they feel that they've been wronged, and they have been wrong, and they are trying to find a way to express that and get some action. We agree on that. But if we get lost in, well, yes, but that's disrespectful, the things that we disagree with, we will never come together. So maybe as peacemakers in the church, we can try to help ourselves and other people find, well, let's break it down. What do you really agree on? Let's put aside all of the, the things that bug you about it, but why are you doing it? And can we agree on your heart? And I think we might find we have more in common than we thought.
And I was just about to point to you, Jan. I was literally about to point to you. And Jan has always talked about finding common ground. And you read my mind. What am I thinking now?
How do you know what common ground is if you stay within your comfortable bubble?
Yeah.
You've got to go outside of your bubble, and everybody has a bubble. And people are now, some are trying to break those bubbles, and it's impacting our safety of our bubble. So how are we going to act differently? Sorry, wave the microphone.
Yeah.
How are we going to act differently? And how are we going to help break our own to really listen and understand and see the commonalities and where we can align to move forward side by side instead of adversarially?
So let me wrap this up because we got to let the second servicers in. But so it sounds like on an individual level, it would behoove us as carriers of the gospel to find those common ground things, because the protester in the street is concerned with righteousness. We're concerned with righteousness. That's a common ground place where we can begin to listen and talk and interact with folks, because we have to do that. And I can tell you as a church, I am, Kurt Owens and I were supposed to connect together for lunch, but it was on Tuesday election day, and I think we both got carried away with trying to get our vote in and stuff like that. But here's Kurt, who's launching several ministries in inner city Milwaukee, and he and I made a connection. And I am hoping that we can continue meeting together and maybe even develop some relationships amongst churches to continue to have those open conversations. So that we're not just doing this on an individual level, but we're beginning to make the connections with the other churches to figure out how can we together be applying the gospel and trying to be something of an alternative to this world that only understands either retreat or attack and doesn't understand there's a third way. So, hey, thanks for being a part of this. We have to wrap it up, but unfortunately, because we were having those good conversations. But just to let you know, Jan gets the credit. She's the one that came to me and said, "I got an idea," and I said, "That's a great idea. Let's go with it." So I only get credit for going, okay. Hey, let me pray first. Father, thanks for this time. I pray that we are carriers of the gospel, and it affects every relationship that we have in a way that honors you and brings you glory. I pray we continue forward in this conversation in terms of actions and attitudes and even self-assessment, as Laura said. And I just pray that we would do this in the name of Christ and in his grace and to his honor. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.